All right, good morning, grade 12. You already have activity 4.4 to do today. I am also going to finish the theory of chapter 4 with you today. I am going to look at the section that is called the corrections of the balance of payments disequilibrium, and you can find this in your textbook on page 90. Right, so when we're talking about the balance of payments disequilibrium, remember I did mention when we did the balance of payments that when we talk about a disequilibrium, it means that the balance of payments is either having a surplus or a deficit. All right, equilibrium means all the money coming in and all the money going out is exactly equal. Obviously, in reality, that never happens. The balance of payments will always have either a surplus or a deficit. All right, so it doesn't matter if there's a surplus or a deficit, it means it is not in equilibrium. All right, now you'll see sometimes they talk about a fundamental disequilibrium. This means that this disequilibrium is continuously happening year after year for a long period of time, and it tends to get worse over time. Then that is called a fundamental disequilibrium. All right, especially in terms of a deficit. If there's a deficit and every single year we're having a deficit and every year the deficit gets bigger and bigger and bigger, that obviously creates problems, and that is known as a fundamental disequilibrium. Right, so obviously, as I said, the balance of payments is never really in equilibrium. There always seems to be a disequilibrium, and we don't mind deficits and surpluses if they are small. All right, we want a relatively small deficit or surplus. If it gets too big, and as I said, if it carries on for too long, many years, then there's different things that the government can do to decrease that deficit or the surplus. The first solution is lending and borrowing. All right, now obviously we said that countries, in South Africa for example, we have special drawing rights at the IMF. We spoke about that when we did the actual balance of payments. Right, so this last point here refers to that. If we have a fundamental disequilibrium, a deficit, we can borrow money from the IMF. This borrowing money is called those special drawing rights. SDRs, special drawing right of the IMF. Remember, IMF stands for International Monetary Fund. Right, obviously, when we have a deficit, we will borrow. When we have a surplus, we will repay the money that we have borrowed before. Right, then countries that have surpluses can also lend money to countries with deficits. So countries can also borrow money from each other. That is why some developing countries tend to have so much foreign debt, because they have deficits year after year, and they tend to borrow more and more money. Every single year they have to borrow money from another country to reduce their deficit, and this debt tends to build up. All right, so if we have a surplus, we are able then to lend money to others. It helps us to decrease our surplus, and it helps the other country obviously to decrease their deficit. The second solution is changes in demand. All right, now when there's changes in demand, there's different policies that we can use to create a change in demand. Okay, two long-term policies that I'm only going to refer to here, because both of these policies are actually essay questions in chapter 5. We will also do that soon. All right, so the two long-term policies that we can use as part of our international trade strategy is called export promotion and import substitution. All right, in terms of export promotion, this is a positive strategy whereby the government uses incentives like export subsidies to encourage local producers to produce more and to export their surpluses. So certain incentives are given to local producers to enable them to help them to produce higher quantities, increase the volume of their production, and then to export a bigger variety of things. Now, higher volume and a bigger variety of things that we are exporting. All right. Obviously, by promoting our exports, by increasing our exports, more money will be coming into the country, and that will help us to reduce our deficit. The other long-term policy is called import substitution. All right, import substitution is a negative strategy. This is all about the government trying to discourage imports. Okay, remember, import is a leakage, so money will leave the country. If we make use of import substitution, basically what this means is the government tries and encourage local people or local producers to produce things that we used to import. So we're trying to replace imported goods with locally produced goods instead. All right, so it entails basically establishing industries in the country that we didn't have before, because we are now trying to produce things that we have never produced ourselves before. We always used to import. Okay, now we don't want to import anymore, and the government will provide incentives to encourage local producers to produce those things locally instead. Right, so because we are trying to decrease imports, less money will be flowing out of the country. This will also assist in reducing our deficit. Right, the second policy that we can use to influence demand is monetary policy. You'll see we're also going to refer to fiscal policy, but remember, monetary and fiscal policy, both of them are demand-side policies. So the Reserve Bank can obviously make use of their monetary policy. Any of the monetary policy instruments can be used. All right, I'm going to specifically focus here on the interest rates, but remember they can also use their open market transactions. They can also use their credit reserve requirement. Any of the instruments they can use. Right, but if the Reserve Bank, for example, changes the interest rate, the repo rate, and then through the repo rate, obviously the interest rates, if, for example, they increase interest rates, remember when interest rates increase, our debt becomes more expensive. All right, at a higher interest rate, obviously my mortgage payment, my house repayment is going to cost me more per month. My car repayment is costing me more. Any credit that I might have, like Edgar's card or Willie's card, is going to cost me more. My personal loans are going to cost me more. And after I paid all my debt, obviously I have less money then left to spend on other stuff. So when interest rates increases because our debt gets more expensive, we have less money available to spend, which means it will decrease spending. And remember, we said that people spend either on locally produced goods, but they also spend their money on imported goods. So if we don't have as much money to spend, we will spend less money on local goods, but we will also spend less money on imports. So increasing interest rates can be used if we have a deficit to decrease the spending on imports, to decrease the outflow of money, to decrease that deficit. At the same time, if interest rates increases, obviously if you're a saver, you are paying more interest. But if you are an investor, you are earning interest. So the minute that interest rates increases, foreign investors will be encouraged to invest their money in our country, and that will bring money into our country, which obviously will also help to decrease the deficit. All right, and this is a strategy that works fairly well in the short term. It's not a long-term policy because effects can be seen almost instantly in the economy. People are going to have to adjust their spending very, very quickly. All right. Obviously, if interest rate decreases, the opposite will happen. All right. So if they have a deficit that they need to deal with, they will increase the interest rates because increasing interest rates decreases our spending, decreases the imports, but also brings money into the country if investors are following these high interest rates to invest their money. All right, if obviously there's a surplus, they will decrease the interest rates and everything else will happen oppositely. Right, then the government can also make use of import controls. Right, and again, this we will look at in detail in Chapter 5 as well, as part of import substitution. All right, so import controls means that there are certain things that the government can do to discourage people from importing things from other countries. Okay, it'll include things like import tariffs, customs duties, the tax that they add on imported goods. Obviously, when they're adding a customs duty on an imported product, taxes make things more expensive. So by adding a tax, a customs duty or an import tax, they are making the imported goods look more expensive because people now also have to pay the tax. And we all know that if prices increase, quantity demanded will decrease. So if imports are looking more expensive because of this extra tax now, less people are going to be willing to pay these prices and imports will decrease. All right, quotas, I did mention before, but a quota is literally where they limit, they restrict the amount of articles that we can import from another country. All right, so it literally restricts the amount of imports that comes into the country. All right. Now, the World Trade Organization, we'll talk about that in detail in Chapter 5, in the years gone past, obviously all countries have made use of some form of protectionism, like the customs duties and like the quotas. But nowadays the movement is towards free trade. The World Trade Organization really is encouraging countries to reduce these kind of import controls so that we can make trade more free. All right, but we will look at that in chapter 5. Right, the next strategy from the demand side is exchange control. Right, we've also spoken about this before. These are the regulations that allow central banks to ration foreign exchange. Remember, I said to you that each person is only allowed to buy a certain amount of foreign exchange in any given year, and that is what this is. That is part of exchange control. All right, remember, people that want to buy foreign exchange, they have to go to their financial institution, they have to literally prove that they are going overseas, they have to show their plane ticket. You can only get it, I think, 30 days before you actually leave. People cannot freely buy and sell currency in South Africa. That is what exchange control is. People that receive foreign exchange, okay, exporters, for example, if you are earning foreign exchange, you are compelled by law also to hand it over to the central bank. We are not allowed to keep any foreign exchange. Now, when we come back from our trips, we have to go to the bank and we have to exchange our dollars into rand again. All right. Now, that's just one of the exchange controls that we have. I did explain this earlier in this chapter. All right, but exchange control literally means that not anybody can just have access to foreign exchange. You literally have to apply in order to buy the foreign exchange, and every person has a limit. Once you reach this limit, you are not able to buy any foreign currency again until the next financial year. All right. Now, we had lots and lots of exchange controls that was introduced in 1930s. They tightened them up in 1961, but some of them have been relaxed, but obviously we still have some others. Okay, like in the past, we had like a financial rand and a commercial rand, and that was cancelled. All right, but the fact that not anybody can buy foreign currency, that is still in place. Right, the last demand side policy is the fiscal policy. Fiscal policy, remember, the government can make use of their taxes or their government spending to either increase or decrease demand. If they increase direct taxes, remember that decreases people's disposable income, and we can only spend money that we have. The more taxes we pay, the less income we have, disposable income we have, and the less disposable income that we have, the less we can spend. So if there's a deficit, increasing direct taxes can also decrease that deficit by limiting people's income and reducing their spending. Right, same with the government spending. If the state lowers their government spending, remember, government spending is an injection. So if they decrease their government spending, they are injecting less money into the economy, which will also cause a decrease in demand. Right, so they increase taxes and they decrease government spending. These are the strategies that they can use in terms of their fiscal policy in order to reduce a deficit. If there's a surplus, obviously we want to stimulate the demand. Then they will decrease the taxes and increase the government spending. Right, that's the second strategy from the demand side. What can they do to manipulate demand? The third strategy is that they can do changes in the exchange rate. Right, now this depends on the system, the exchange rate system that is used in a country. All right, because obviously when you're using a floating exchange rate system, the Reserve Bank doesn't have much control over what happens to the exchange rate. Okay. So if we're using a floating exchange rate system, the disequilibrium can be corrected through changes in exchange rate, but it happens automatically. There's no deliberate interference by the Reserve Bank in a floating exchange rate system because it is not allowed. Okay, the floating exchange rate system works automatically. All right. So what happens if we have a deficit? Okay, if we have a deficit, it means that our imports are higher than our exports. All right. So because we are importing a lot, there's an excess demand for foreign currency. Now we are demanding dollars because we are importing a lot from America. A deficit means we have excessive imports. All right. So these imports has to be paid for. And in order to pay for our imports, we are going to sell rand in order to buy foreign currency. Right, so there's an excess supply of rand because we are selling our rands in order to buy foreign currency. So we're creating a demand for foreign currency. Now, when there's an excess demand for foreign currency or an excess supply of rand, we are selling rand and selling rand and selling rand and selling rand in order to buy foreign currency to pay for our imports. This oversupply of rand is going to cause the rand to depreciate. And when the rand depreciates, automatically our exports are becoming cheaper and our imports becoming more expensive. If our exports is becoming cheaper, our exports will increase, our imports are becoming more expensive, so they will decrease, and this will automatically reduce also the deficit. If we have a surplus, okay, a surplus on the balance of payments means that our exports are higher than our imports. Exports are higher than our imports. This means that we are exporting a lot. So there's lots of foreigners that have to pay us in rand for our exports. This means they are selling their dollars in order to buy our rand. So in this case, they are selling dollars and selling dollars and selling dollars in order to buy rand and buy rand and buy rand. There's an excess demand. Everybody's buying rand and selling foreign currency. Now, because of this, because they are buying rand and there's a big demand for rand on the international market, rands are going to become scarce, which will make it appreciate. And automatically, when the rand appreciates, obviously our exports becomes more expensive now, and we will export less. Now, other countries won't buy from us so much anymore because it's now too expensive. And at the same time, a stronger rand means that our imports becomes cheaper. And if imports becomes cheaper, it will increase. So if exports are decreasing and imports are increasing, the surplus on the balance of payments will decrease automatically. Okay, remember, in a floating exchange rate system, it happens automatically. Right, it's not the Reserve Bank selling rand or buying rand, it's people out there. So it happens automatically. There's no deliberate interference. If a country makes use of a fixed exchange rate system, obviously now there will be deliberate intervention, right? So the currency can be devalued, right? So if they have a deficit, if the country has a deficit, they will sell rand and sell rand and sell rand and sell rand in order to make it easily available to devalue the currency. And then from there, the effect is going to be the same, right? If the currency is weaker, imports becomes very expensive, exports becomes cheaper, less money going out, more money coming in, and the deficit will go away. Or on the other hand, if the country has a surplus, they can deliberately revalue the currency by buying that currency. Now, if we're buying rand and buying rand to make rand scarce, the rand will revalue, and at a higher value, if the rand is stronger, obviously our imports now becomes cheaper and will increase, exports is more expensive and will decrease, and the surplus will be reduced. Just remember, I refer here to rand because that's our currency, but remember in South Africa we don't have a fixed exchange rate system anymore. We use a floating exchange rate. So this is just theoretically. Okay, at the time when we were using a fixed exchange rate system, this will be deliberate intervention by the Reserve Bank. Whereas a floating exchange rate system, there's no deliberate intervention, it just happens on its own. Right, lastly, if we use a managed floating exchange rate system, remember this is where the value of the rand is determined by demand and supply, but the Reserve Bank has the right to intervene when they think the currency is getting either too strong or too weak. All right, so this will work basically the same as a fixed exchange rate system. We just use the correct terminology. All right, so if there's a deficit, the Reserve Bank can use the reserves to create a depreciation in the rand. In other words, again, they will sell rand and sell rand and sell rand to make it more easily available, in which case the value of the rand will decrease. Okay, the rand will depreciate. Right, and if the rand depreciates, obviously our imports becomes more expensive and exports becomes cheaper. Imports will decrease, exports will increase, and that will reduce the deficit. In the case of an appreciation, obviously if there's a surplus on the balance of payments, the Reserve Bank can create deliberately an appreciation of the rand by buying rand. They buy rand and buy rand and buy rand to make rand scarce. If the rand appreciates, imports now becomes cheaper and will increase. Exports more expensive, so it'll decrease. More money going out, less money coming in, and that will reduce the surplus. All right. With a managed floating exchange rate system, this is also deliberately done by the Reserve Bank. Okay, but remember again, we don't use currently a managed floating exchange rate system, so this cannot be done currently, right? In theory, if we were using a managed floating exchange rate system, the Reserve Bank could intervene deliberately by buying or selling rand. Right, the last thing that we're going to look at in terms of reducing the disequilibrium is increasing the aggregate supply. All right, now there's an aggregate supply will increase if there's a decrease in the general price level. All right, remember there's a decrease in production cost, that will increase supply. All right, so if we can decrease the prices, local prices that is charged for locally produced goods, that can automatically create an increase in aggregate supply. If we can increase our supply, if we can produce more to increase our supply, obviously then we can increase exports if we are producing surpluses. And if we are able to produce enough that we don't need to import, that'll create a decrease in imports. And obviously this will then correct a deficit on the balance of payments. All right, just examples of what we can do to increase aggregate supply. Obviously, you remember also we spoke about this in Chapter 2, reducing the production cost through various measures. We can make the markets more efficient, encourage competition, deregulation. All of those things still stand, and you can use this here as well. All right, but other examples to improve the quantity and the quality of the labor force. Okay, obviously more workers can do more work, produce more. And a trained worker, remember the quality of the labor force refers to training and education. A trained worker is more productive than an untrained worker. So if we provide training to the labor force, that will obviously increase their productivity, which means the total of our supply can increase as well. Second point, increasing the quantity and the quality of capital stock through investment. Obviously, we need to encourage investments. We want to encourage businesses to invest in new technology, in new machinery and equipment and whatever, because that also enables us to do mass production. If we have technology, we can do mass production, and that can also increase the total production, more produced in a small amount of time. Right, third point links up with that, encouraging technological improvement and the use of appropriate technology. Obviously, in a country like ours where the unemployment rate is very high, we need to find a balance between labor-intensive production methods and capital-intensive production methods. But obviously, capital-intensive, when we make use of technology, it does speed up the production process. We can standardize our products. We can do mass production. In terms of increasing the aggregate supply, improving technology and implementing this technology in our production processes is vital. Right, improve capital and labor productivity. As I said, labor productivity we can improve through education and training, through maintaining a healthy workforce. Healthy workers are more productive, making use of incentives, giving people a reason to want to work harder and do more work in a given period of time. Okay, like bonuses or increasing salaries or whatever. Right. Lowering the cost of labor, like wages and salaries, this goes a long way to reduce production cost, right? Remember we said when there's a reduction in production cost, that is when firms will be able to increase their supply because their costs are lower. And a large percentage of a total production cost for any business is made up from wages and salaries, right? So we have to be reasonable in terms of salary negotiations and not make like excessive demands for increases and whatever. All right, and the last point, you're reducing taxes and increasing subsidies. This links in, remember, with Chapter 1. Taxes will increase prices, subsidies will decrease prices. If we want to increase our supply, we need to decrease prices, right? So we need to reduce the amount of taxes that we are adding onto the prices of goods and services, and provide more subsidies to decrease the prices of goods and services. Right, so this will then conclude chapter 4. We have, I think, 2 more activities to go after the one that I sent this morning. So get started on that one. And then as from today, I will be sending activities every day, but I will also be sending lessons every day. So we're going to start covering more content. All right. So tomorrow we are going to continue with chapter 3, where we left off. Right. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.